Welcome to my second webinar, if you'd like to call it that, on research project BUSN 2019. I just wanted to spend a bit of time. This is going to take 15 minutes, half an hour, to really make very clear what we mean in terms of our assignment 1 and assignment 2 when we say research project. Now, I think that most of you, even good students, are really struggling with getting this concept. So I've decided to put together this video to try and make it as clear as possible what we mean and how to tackle this. You guys haven't had extensive training in research. You've had some. You've had one unit which went over all the key concepts, and I want you to go back and grab that textbook from last semester or whenever you studied research and business and look at some of the key terms. I'll just go through some of those key terms. Write these down if necessary. Variables, population, sampling, method, analysis. If you can focus on those 5 terms and make sure you understand what they mean, you'll begin to get in your mind what these two assignments are about when we're talking about research. This is not another literature review. Scholarly articles are not data, not in a normal sense. Yes, technically we could create a research project that used scholarly articles as a form of data, but that would mean having to have a plan for the analysis. I'm going to search for every, turning research papers into data would require you to treat research papers as data. That means you have to define the population of research papers that you're going to analyze. You'd have to define how you're going to sample them precisely. You could have to define how you're going to analyze them. So I'll give you an example if you wanted to do this, but I don't recommend that you do this. But if you wanted to, this is what a researcher would do when they used research papers as data. They'd say, okay, I'm going to use Google Scholar as a search engine, and I'm going to search for every article that has the word employee engagement in the title, and it has to be a peer-reviewed article, and it has to be in a business journal. And I will define business journals as this set of 55 journals are going to be called the business journals that that's my population. Then you would press go in Google Scholar and you'd get 1,800 articles. That would be your sample, or that would be your population. I'm then going to sample them randomly. 1 in every 30 articles I'm going to analyze. So you'll have 60 articles you'll analyze. And then I'm going to, for example, my analysis is going to be looking at how the word employee engagement is defined. And so you're going to have to look through all 60 articles and look very precisely at the definitions and then collect them together in a table and analyze differences and similarities between how employee engagement is defined, blah, 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 blah. You can see that's very different to just reading some articles and writing about employee engagement. You're treating the journal articles like data. So I don't recommend you do that. That's hard work, harder than it has to be. I'm going to go through, start off by defining what secondary data really means to make sure that you're not focusing either on doing a literature review, which I think a lot of you are trying to do, or doing a primary data selection or sourcing for primary data. And I think then once we've defined secondary data, I'll go through a number of examples of sources where you can get them and how you can create a research project out of them quickly and easily. All right. So secondary data, unlike primary data, is data that's been collected by other people, not specifically for your research questions, the one that you're going to ask. So you can't simply borrow someone else's data and their research approach. For example, you can't take one of the reports that is on the Australian or other Bureau of Statistics and just rehash it, and that's your work. You actually have to not collect data, but grab someone else's data and do your own analysis on it. But it's data that's been collected by others for a purpose, such as collecting population data, or creating an archive somewhere, like all the newspaper articles in the business news from a particular newspaper. That could be a source of secondary data. It wasn't collected, so you could do your analysis, but you could do your analysis on it. And for example, a Google search, Google the search engine, and its results were not presented just for you. It was created to help everybody out in the world go out and collect or refine a search for a particular kind of data that they're searching for. So Google would be a source of data, secondary source of data. It also, as it says here, it involves the analysis of documents that contain information about something that we want to study. And it may contain many other kinds of information. So for example, websites, company websites, let's say that they're the source of data. Now they weren't created for you as a researcher, they were created as partly a marketing tool for companies, or they were created because there's legal requirements to have publicly available information about listed companies, for example. But they're there, and it contains information that you can use, secondary data. And another way of looking at it's research that's already been compiled and organised for you, more or less. Now, I want to talk about, I might shove this onto full scale. Let's see if I can get this up. Where will you find data? Classic spot, Australian Bureau of Statistics. I actually don't like to do it this way. Now I'm going to bring up the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I will quickly search for it. There we go, and there we go. Now if you have a look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and you can also do a search for the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics or the French Bureau of Statistics. I mean, some of you come from overseas, feel free to analyse data from your own local Bureau of Statistics and maybe do a comparison between some basic data from that source and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. But if you click on statistics, you can find these links will take you to all sorts of Excel data that you can then reanalyze for your purpose. So for example, to do with earnings and work hours, there's an interesting one there. Average earnings, wage and salary earning statistics for small areas. That will enable you to, for example, if I zoom in there, that one will enable you to come up with a research project that could answer the question, is the further distance you live from a major capital city, such as Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, does the distance you live from a major capital city impact on your earnings, and in particular your earnings in relation to the kind of category of data or profession that you are involved with, whether you're an accountant or a professional, or whether you're an engineer or a tradesperson. There is a huge amount of data on here, and it's up to you to go poking around and find variables that suit the purpose of your project. A lot of you are thinking about a project and then thinking, well, you're not thinking hard enough about how will I analyze this? How will I find data on this? You can't just simply say, I'm going to do a project looking at, for example, corruption in small and medium firms. Where are you going to get data on that? So don't think about a project oh, I'm interested in this, so I'm going to do it. You have to think, I'm interested in this. Is it possible for me to get data? If the answer is no, then move on to the next subject until you can think of something where you can get data. Okay, Australian Bureau of Statistics, you can click on that. And then there's these open data sites. So I'm going to bring up here again, and we'll have a look at United States open data. There's a European open data. This one's the American one, data.gov. There's Australian open data, there's French open data, there's EU open data. This one's particularly useful. And you can see there's 192,000 data sets, a huge amount of data. You might pick education, higher education data sets, includes information about every college, university, technical. You need to poke around in here to look for something that contains data, and I do expect you to do some effort to do an analysis of that data yourself, not simply steal the analysis of someone else, which is plagiarism, and claim it as your own analysis. I don't mind how simple your analysis is, but I do mind if it's not yours, or at least an attempt to make it yours, that you have put some effort into the analysis stage. So open data sets are a wonderful source of information. Even little countries have them, and you can search by search boxes or you can search by categories. A clever way to do this is through Google Advanced Search. And you know, data, the easy way to find Google Advanced Search is to search for Google Advanced Search and then bring it up, and you can actually look for file type Excel. Inevitably, that's data. And you might look for employment, mining, and you'll find all these Excel files that contain, for example, this one here. This is a fatality report talking about fatality in mining and quarrying, which is a form of mining industries. And you can create a research project around health and safety and risk, for example. Before I go from that, another possibility, there's all sorts of Google Advanced Searches. You can use Twitter, you can use Facebook, you can use Instagram, and have a look at corporate sites of Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and look at their social media presence and the degree, the frequency with which they tweet or post to Facebook, and use that as one of your variables. So you could create a project that said there is or there isn't a relationship between social media presence or frequency of social media posting and, for example, health and safety policy, company transparency, profitability, another variable, which you can then, for example, profitability, you can look at company annual reports to find out the profitability. So you could then collect data on the one hand, and I will zoom in on myself. You can collect data on the one hand about social media presence, and you can do that by, I'm going to analyze Twitter, the frequency with which people, large companies tweet, and I'm going to have a look at their corporate performance. Now, you'll need to think of some sort of reason why social media presence and company performance will be connected. And if you can come up with some sort of reason, I propose that social media frequency of posting is associated with company performance because of some sort of marketing theory. For those of you studying marketing, okay, here's an example of the kind of project you can do by taking two different sources of data and putting them into the one project. It doesn't mean you have to go out and collect thousands of company data. You can emphasize, you can look at 20 company reports and 20 company Twitter sites, do an analysis of how they come together, and You could analyze what they tweet about and look about characteristics of the firms and what they tweet about. That can be your the basis of your findings. Let me give you an example of another way to look at it. You can actually look up Google News. Now, you're all familiar with Google News. Sorry, Google News looks like this. And you can do searches for, let's say, large company, BHP, and you can find news articles about them in there. This is data. It's badly organized, this data, so it's a little bit hard to say, how am I going to sample from this? Will I use only Australian? So that's the Australian, Motley Fool Australia is obviously an Australian firm, Australian Financial Review. I'm going to use Australian media outlets and in the last 5 weeks and how they've talked about BHP as one of my variables. However, there's a better option, as I sort of hinted a few moments ago. We will go and search for Google Advanced News. And what's great about Google Advanced News, News Archive Search, I think. That's the one, Google News Advanced. Have a look at this. You get an option of specifying dates, and you can set dates. So you can set a date from the whole of 2017. And you could look at, for example, one of your variables is the frequency with which a company gets talked about in the media. You can actually do a count of the number of articles in a particular week and have a look at the correlation between share market performance and frequency of being mentioned in the financial media. Is there a positive relationship? Do we like bad news more than good news? So you can analyze the articles of a particular week, look whether it's good news or bad news, have a look at a number of different companies and analyze correlations. So look up that word correlation because it's a handy one for this topic. Correlations between media performance, frequency of media mentions in Google News Advanced, and share market performance. Company websites. Sorry, I've gone a bit wrong here. Company websites are very good. I'm just going to current slide to bring it a little bit bigger. So in these company websites, you can, they also have search boxes for you to search for particular kinds of policies. Inside those policies, you can do an analysis for the mention of particular terms. So, for example, companies that mention staff, people, or well-being, or democracy, or some sort of words that relate to a particular construct that you're interested in. Just 1 second. I'm just going to grab a book off my shelf. Just 1 second. Now, either in your degree so far, let's say that you're in marketing or whether you're in HR, for example, you'll have had these undergraduate textbooks, or these not undergraduate textbooks, these basic introductory textbooks to, for example, organizational behavior. And in there, there'll be chapters that are devoted to a number of different things. A student asked me today about, I've been asked about organizational citizenship behavior. That can become one of your variables. Organizational citizenship behavior is the degree to which a company engages in good corporate citizenship, ways that are ethical, ways that are, for example, look at this one here on Ernst & Young. The green leaves signify or indicate that it's a sustainable, environmentally friendly company, for example, or it might signify growth, by the way. But organizational citizenship behavior can probably be measured on company websites by looking for signs of ethical investment, or investing in people, sustainability and welfare, those type of keywords or concepts. So if you can find some sort of way to take one of these constructs and operationalize it, that's a key word, operationalize it in a way that you can analyze a website and say, okay, I'm going to rate Ernst & Young a 10 for organizational citizenship behavior. And then you'll go and have a look at BHP, for example. And you do the same analysis with BHP and you say, I'm going to rate that a 6 out of 10. And some other companies might be a 0 because they have no inclination towards organizational citizenship behavior at all, just as an example. And then you've got 20 companies, you've assigned them with a score from 1 to 10 on organizational citizenship behaviors, and then you say, okay, I'm going to have a look at the relationship between that ranking or rating for organizational citizenship behaviors based upon the company websites, which I've analyzed in this, and this way, and I'm going to look and see how that impacts on company performance, which I will measure by going to the stock market, for example. And you can find stock market data. I'm not very familiar with this, but you can find that either in stock market performance like the NASDAQ or New York Times performance data, or you could look at annual reports for companies. You know, listed companies have to provide annual reports. So you could create two different sources of data. One would be company policy websites on organizational citizenship behavior, and the other one would be stock market performance based on a website such as this, and do a correlation between those two variables and say, yes, there is evidence that organizational citizenship behavior is related to stock market performance in this or this way. Another classic source of data that you should consider using is jobs websites. Now, this subject is called Professional Project. So we do encourage students to use this to explore what the notion of their profession is. So I talked a little bit in class, and your lecturer on your campus will have done so too, about the notion of the profession. The profession, as I described it in class, is the degree to which a particular kind of occupation is fenced off from the rest of the job world. Accountancy, for example, in order to become an accountant, you have to have X, Y, and Z qualifications that are very strictly policed by a professional organization. There's things like membership fees, and there's also the potential for you to be thrown over the fence to the other side of the fence because you've been very naughty. So some sort of policing of membership. There's all these different characteristics of the profession that it's good for you to become familiar with as you progress out into the real world at the end of your degree here. Now, the kind of searches that you can do into aspects of the profession that you could do a research project on include jobs. And I'd like to zoom out of this so that I can zoom in. And you can look at, under classification, different kinds of jobs. There's accountancy jobs or engineering jobs. You can pick them. You can pick regions. Look at Queensland versus New South Wales. Look at country Queensland versus Brisbane. And you can look at enter different keywords like senior management, for example, in there. And then you open up, which we'll do. We will have a look at, for example, a popular one, Seek.com. And we will look at accounting professions, and we will look at management, and we will look at Queensland, the whole of Queensland, for example. All right, we've got 619. That's the population. So just to reiterate for those of you who need reminding, we've defined the population in this case as all jobs in Seek.com that mention the word management, that are in the field of accountancy in the state of Queensland, and the total population number is 619. You then say, I'm going to sample 20% of those. That would be 120, 125, let's say, jobs. And I'm going to look at 125 jobs. You'll need to make sure how you randomly sample them, because will you randomly sample them? Will you sample the first, most recent 125 jobs? Because that would be simply a matter of looking at over here. It says 5 hours ago that was posted, 22 hours ago that was posted, 1 day ago. We'll just use the 125 most recent job ads. We'll then open those job ads up, and we will have a look at characteristics of those job ads, how much they're paying, what you need to succeed. You'll have to have that kind of qualification. So in this particular field, for example, accountancy, we could ask how many management jobs in Seek.com defined as entry level or at a certain salary level mention the need for CPA or other professional qualifications. I imagine it would be very high indeed, probably 100%. So that would enable you to say in your analysis that professional accreditation now dominates accountancy, and that it's impossible to get a management job in accountancy without having a CCA or CPA qualification. Note it says here, or progressing this. So they're opening the door to people who haven't got full accreditation but are making progress towards it. Or you could look at how these companies that in your sample define themselves. How many of them refer to growth or sustainability, or how many of them define the company in terms of who they're looking for? You've just got to come up with your own project, your own questions. But for you, in terms of your own personal development, as you head towards the end of your degree and your time at CQU, reading these job ads very carefully and analysing these job ads is probably an interesting thing to do in itself for you, and a worthwhile thing for you to do. So begin to think about the world beyond jobs. Okay. So look, have a look at the slides that I've posted in the news forum, because this slide, I won't go through it in great detail, but it gives you an idea of the sheer range of secondary data that you can use in order to do your project. Company databases and ads, to emails you probably can't get access to. But you can certainly get access to their public blogs, their public websites, their podcasts, their Twitter feeds, their public Facebook sites, that type of thing. Their newsletters are often stored online. Books I wouldn't regard in this case as a good way to go, but government publications is a possibility. But remember, you need to try and define your population and how you're going to sample them and analyse them in a systematic way. I'd encourage you to think in terms of quantitative data, because particularly for students that are coming to this from a second language, where English is not their first language, doing qualitative data which focuses on analysis of language is a big hurdle for you. And it's much easier for you to work, for example, with averages and differences, doing some basic statistics such as ANOVAs, t-tests, or correlations. Just remember some of those phrases. Now, here's again on the slides you can see some more examples, and there's some very strong warnings here about not attempting to go out and collect your own primary data, but you need to use secondary data. And basically, the key thing I want to say here is if you do not do this, if you submit an assignment that is simply a literature review, that just goes into the literature, and where you claim that your data is just some scholarly books and peer-reviewed journals, that's your data, you will fail this subject, because that's not the point of doing research. as I said right at the beginning of this video, if you want to systematically analyze peer-reviewed journals or peer-reviewed journal articles, and that will be your data, then you're going to have to do a very good job of systematically analyzing, not just dipping in the first 5 or 10, 15 articles I read, I'm going to call them my data. That will not constitute data. There won't be any proper method to your project, and you will definitely fail. I won't talk about in too much detail about the issue of selecting a project topic, but clearly this is one that's very important to you. And if you at this stage haven't contacted your lecturer or your tutor with a project topic and got an okay from us, I would urge you not to completely panic. I assume you've been making progress on the assignment. So for example, in the assignment 1, the first part of that assignment is to talk about your profession and the nature of the profession. Now you should be making progress with that. That's a relatively easy part of this course. The hard part for a lot of you is selecting a project topic that is suitable and doable. And for most of you, as I've said before, the question of doable has come down to, can I find the data? So just to reiterate, and for those of you who've got it now, you can stop listening to this video. But for those of you who are still struggling a little bit, let me say this. In order to do this project reasonably well, so that you can get a decent pass or credit or distinction, or even maybe a high distinction, you need to look for a source of data that is related to your profession: management, HR, marketing, accountancy. That the profession that you've studied for in your master's degree or your postgraduate degree. So you need to find a source of data that relates to your profession. The question that you come up with eventually, or the research question, or the research aim, or research focus, doesn't have to be brilliant, but it should at least be, what is the nature of X? So, for example, what are large employers in the metropolitan big accountancy firms looking for in candidates for entry-level accountancy? That's a descriptive question, asking you simply to describe the characteristics, what they're looking for. A descriptive project, that's good. The second level would be one that's driven by a question like, what is the relationship, or what is the cause of X? So what is the cause of high salaries? What is the relationship between job candidate characteristics, like qualifications, how high a level of qualifications, bachelor, master's, PhD, and salary within the profession of HR or marketing, for example. So it's a relationship question. And you can use correlation, simple correlation measures to measure that. You can answer these questions using a qualitative approach. But so, for example, a qualitative approach, you might say, I'm going to have a look at some top jobs advertised in Seek.com, and I'm going to analyze 25 ads and have a look at how they word the characteristics of what they're looking for in a candidate. And you can use some quotes from those job ads in your results and analysis sections of your project. I think one of the more advanced level kind of projects you can do, as I've said, is where you take two different sources of data and answer questions that are actually the kind of questions that people like me at university as researchers do. Um, you know, looking at relationships that have a little bit of sense to them, a bit of logic to them, that are kind of meaningful. So for example, is the degree, here's a complicated one, hard to do, but it's the kind of question that we do ask ourselves. Is the degree to which big mining companies talk about employee safety related to actual employee safety? So for that, you could have a look at the company health and safety policies on the web, find out how long they are, how often they emphasize, that terms like employee safety is paramount, the degree to which they have a zero tolerance policy towards violations of health and safety requirements. That will be one variable. And look at whether that's related to actual accidents. For that, you may need to look at, for example, the Ombudsman reports. If you're looking for a source, if you've come up with a question like that, and you're close, but you can't quite find or think of how to find a source of data for one of your variables between the two of them, you can always get in contact with me, and I will bring up my contact details here. Preferably email me, and I'll try and get back fairly promptly. When I say promptly, within 24 hours. So I'm hoping that this was useful in getting you a little bit closer to where you have to go, and understanding the distinction between the kind of work that you've done throughout your course, which involved writing a lot of reports and reflections and doing quizzes and things like that, and this, which is the big one, doing a research project of your own, which you can hopefully pop into your CV and say, look, I did an independent, in final year, I did an independent research project on da 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 da, and even potentially attach that research project or offer a link to a PDF of that research project, if it's a good one. And that very act, I hope for you, does kind of emphasize that you need to come up with a good project, one that will make employers think, I'd love to know the answer to that question. I must get this person in for an interview because I'm going to ask them, how did that turn out? What was the relationship between the degree to which people talk about health and safety and actual accidents? Is it going to be the kind of research project that will help you get a job in your profession or not? That's actually surely what all this is about. So thanks very much, and stay in touch, and good luck.